Continuing to focus on if statements, in this video we will be talking about if statements that contain multiple Boolean expressions. In a past video we talked about Boolean expressions used in an if statement, and we've talked about using simple Boolean variables or values in our if statements. In this one, we're going to focus specifically on having multiple Boolean expressions inside of an if statement. And to do that, we're going to use logical operators. We're going to spend some time with the logical AND. If you remember the logical AND, it looks like this. And then we are going to focus on the logical OR that looks like that. So make sure that you have gone through the logical operators video and you understand the logical AND and the logical OR. And if you haven't been through the previous if videos, make sure you run through those really quick. So let's get started. If statements using multiple Boolean expressions. Now, as we spoke about in the past, if statements are looking for a true or false as the end result. That's all they want, is a single true or a single false to determine whether or not the content of its block gets executed. So again, go back to this contrived example that you'll see all over the place with a true or a false that will always execute code here. And if we go through this really quick, the if statement right here, if the expression within the parens is true, this code block will execute, which means all the code inside that block will execute. If this is false, or the result of whatever is in here is false, then this block gets bypassed. The code inside the block never gets executed. All right, so there's a quick refresher on the if statement. So let's talk about multiple Boolean expressions using the logical operators first, and then we'll dive into how to use them in an if statement. So let's go over the AND operator, the logical AND. You'll also see it like this if you see it in text. So capital AND, all caps, and then capital OR. So AND, if we have two expressions, we want to make sure that that compound expression equates to either true or false. Now, this is where we get into more complex, or a more complex ability to handle more complex scenarios within our code, where we have multiple questions that have to be asked, and whether or not each of those Boolean expressions equate to true or false in sum or together would determine whether or not to do something or not to do something. So let's come up with an example really quick here that we can use. So let's do a couple of compound Boolean expressions really quick. So let's capture the result of the compound Boolean expression by giving ourselves a variable, and we're just going to call it result. No reason, I just decided to call it result. And let's say, is 1 equal to 5 and is 6 equal to 12? And then let's go ahead and let's put that out to our console, and let's see what our results are. We get a false, all right? So let's extract these out individually just so we can see what's going on here. And let's just put them directly into a console.log. So we've got 1 is equal to 5, so that's one Boolean expression. And we've got our 6 is equal to 12 Boolean expression. And if we execute that, we should see a false for this one, because 1 is definitely not equal to 5. A false for the second one, because 6 is not equal to 12. And then as a whole, both of them equated to false, and we get a false as a result of this compound expression here, or Boolean expression. If we want to make it more readable, we could put parentheses around this if we want, and execute it again, and we get a false. If we wanted to go even further to really show how this all works, we can add parentheses again around the entire thing. And we'll see that these are actually individual expressions that result in Boolean values. In fact, the overall expression also results in a Boolean value because the logical and. Now, if we remember back to the logical and, in this, both the left-hand side operand and the right-hand side operand of the entire operation have to equal to true in order for the overall result to equal true. So if we went ahead and changed this to 5 and we executed it, we are still going to get a false because this one may have been true, but this one was false. And in order for a logical and to be true, both the left and right hand side of the operation have to equate to true. So if we change this one to a 6 and we execute, we'll see that we now get a true. And that is because we've got a Boolean expression here that equates to true, a Boolean expression here that equates to true, and then the overall Boolean expression with the logical and equates to true. So let's go ahead and comment those ones out so they're not in our way, they don't show up in our results. So right here we have seen through two Boolean expressions being used in a compound Boolean expression with the logical and, we can come to a true or false result as the result of two different Boolean questions, right? We were asking two separate questions, and then together, if both of those questions are true, then we want to execute something. The cool part is that we can go ahead and translate that into an if statement, and instead of just getting a result of true or false, we can have something execute as a result of that compound structure right there, that compound Boolean expression. And that is by simply placing that expression inside of our if statement's parentheses and using it as our actual expression for the if statement because it results in a true or false. So in here, console.log, both equate to true. This is happening. All right. As a result of both of these becoming true, as a result, that logical and results in a true as well, and we end up with that output. If either of them, as we've already seen, are false, no output happens. I can change that one back to a 5, change this one back to a 5, operate, nothing. So these both have to be equal in order for the logical and to give us an equal back and for the code inside of the if statement to be executed. Now, as we went through this example, I wrapped stuff in a bunch of parens to make it easier to see. The reality is that there is a order of operation, just like you experience in regular math that you learned in K through 12. The regular operation is that the expression on the left and the right side of the logical and will be executed individually. Their resulting Boolean values will then be placed in here in their stead, and then the logical and will operate on those Boolean values. If we wanted to see that a little bit more drawn out, what we could do is we can put this out here and we can say, okay, so this is what this looks like. And then as JavaScript executes through it, it's going to take this operation right here, and it is going to equate to true, and it's going to store that value. And then this one right here, the 6 and 6, it's going to execute it, and it is going to equate to true. And then it is going to replace this and this with their corresponding values after execution, and you're going to end up with true and true on either side of the logical OR. And then as a result, because both of these are true, and that is what is required for a logical AND, you're going to end up with true as your final result. And then this true ends up being right here, like that. And because if true, then it gets executed. And you can see why people use the if true as their basic example when teaching if statements, because really everything boils down, as you can see, to a very basic true or false value, and that very basic true or false value is what is tested by the if statement. It just looks more complex because we're not doing these outside of the if statement as individuals and then putting the value in there. Instead, we're putting the full-blown compound expression inside of the if statement. So hopefully that helps you understand how compound Boolean expressions inside of an if statement work. So let's do the same thing with our logical OR. We can go ahead and take this exact same example, and instead of using the logical AND, we can use the logical OR, and then we can go ahead and run this. And we should see, let's comment this one out so we're not getting double output. We should see both equate to true. This is happening. Now, in an OR statement, the reality is it's one or the other or both equating to true will actually get us what is inside of the block statement. And so really we can't say both equate to true. It would be one or the other or both are true. This is happening. So again, it is just a compound Boolean expression, 3 different expressions all put together. And if either of these are true or both, what we should get is this output. And as expected, this equates to true, this equates to true, therefore this is true. If this is not true right here, and we run it, we should still get the output, and that is because this one is not, but this one is, therefore we get that output. And if neither of the 2 equations are true, we should get no output whatsoever. So again, let's break this down really quick. In our example, let's pull this one right here, and we'll use the OR instead of the AND. And the breakdown is identical. We've got the 5 equals 5. That one gets executed, ends up being, well, let's make it match our example right here. So we've got a 4, and then this ends up being a 5. So that one ends up being true, and then we have a 6. Actually, this one ends up being false, right? Okay. And this one ends up being false, so we end up with the value. So 5 does not equal 4, so it's false, and 6 does not equal 5, therefore it's false. And then we end up with false or false, and because they are both false, we get ourselves a false in return. And then this false actually replaces all of this, and we end up with if false, and since it's false, the if statement will not execute what's in there because an if statement requires true to be here for this to be executed. And in our example, it ends up being false. And of course, as we've already said, this looks complex, but it's really not when you break it down. So that there is using a compound Boolean expression inside of an if statement in order to control logical flow within your application.